Hello! Finally, I finished a book in this month of October, and that is Babylon Berlin by Volker Kutscher. So, this book is a murder mystery / historical fiction set in 1929 in Berlin, where it was an interesting time and place. And it is the first of a series of books about this detective, Gary and Rat. And I watched the TV show first. So there is a currently 3-season long German TV show, and it's on Netflix in America. And I love it. I would say it's one of my favorite TV shows. Yeah. And I just think it's absolutely fantastic. And so I was dying to read the books, and therefore found this book a bit disappointing. Okay, so it isn't bad by any means, I don't think. But a lot of the stuff that I love in the show is not in the book. And some of that is that Gary and Rat is quite different in the show in some ways than he is in here. He has kind of a slightly different backstory. There's just like layers that are not here. The show also focuses a lot on the character of Charlotte Ritter, whereas in the book she is a character we'd mostly just see through Rat's eyes, and his sort of girlfriend during part of the book. I mean, she still works at, you know, the Alexanderplatz or whatever they call it. The book mostly calls it Alex, which I think is cute, but that's like the police headquarters in Berlin. And she's a stenographer, and she's taking classes to become an actual detective. You know, so she's essentially still the same character. It's just that in the show, we spend so much more time with her. We know about her family, about her other job, about all this other stuff, which I'm not sure how canon any of those things are in the books, because they're not in this book. I don't know about the ones later. And then also, the plot is basically the same mystery plot, except that in the show, first of all, we spent more time with the villains and the antagonists and whoever, seeing what they were doing, whereas in this book, like, we just don't at all. It's all from Rat's perspective, minus like a couple scenes. And we're as unaware of everything going on as he is. And then also in the show, there are a lot of other sort of subplots going on that don't get much mention or any at all in here. Or like are sort of alluded to in here, but we actually see a lot of them in the show. I don't know. So the show just, like, I thought was absolutely fantastic. I'm especially talking about the first 2 seasons, because those are definitely the ones that are taking from this book. But yeah, there's just so much that isn't here, and I was really disappointed by that, because I was looking forward to reading about a lot of that stuff in the book. And it's honestly rare that I come across something where there's less detail in the book than there was on a TV show or a movie. You know, it's usually the other way around. But not here. But it's not a bad book. I kind of like this version of Gary and Rat, but I don't find him anywhere near as compelling as I do the other one. Although one thing, this is a spoiler, but I want to talk about it. The one thing in this book I thought was a little bit more compelling with Rat was there's a scene in both book and show where he kills a man who has been following him, and then buries him in concrete so he won't be found in a construction site. I thought that was a bit more interesting in the book, because it's more clear in the book that he is burying him on purpose to hide him. And then, like a couple days later, when the man's body is found, he's actually assigned to be in charge of the case, trying to figure out what happened to him, which doesn't really happen on the show from what I remember. So, like, on the show, I mean, in both cases he's been taking a mind-altering drug, but in the show it seems a lot more like he's not fully in control of like what he's doing necessarily. I mean, and I think you can assume perhaps that in the show he is also knowingly covering up this murder, but in the book it makes it very clear that that's what he is doing. So, you know, that's an element I kind of like. But outside of that, Gideon from the show is just my baby, and I love him so much. He's like such a mess. And I think the major change is that in the book, Gideon's relationship to the war. So 1929, it's been 10 years since the Great War, and Gideon did not fight in it in the book. He was, I guess, drafted into the military, but it was right at the end of the war, and he didn't actually end up fighting. His older brother, Anno, did fight and died in the war. Also, he has a couple of other siblings in here, which are never mentioned in the show, so I guess they don't exist in the show. I mean, they're briefly mentioned in the book. They don't matter much. But I did think it was kind of interesting that he's got this brother Severin who moved to New Jersey and his parents won't talk about him. They pretend he doesn't exist. I don't know. But anyway, in the show, Gideon did fight in the war and has, like, PTSD as a result. And also there's a lot of drama about how his brother died. And all of that is really interesting. And it's not in here because it's not canon in here. And it makes me kind of wonder, like, what it would be like to have seen the show, being a fan of the book, and be like, holy shit, what did they do? Everything's so different. But listen, the show was fantastic. It's just, Anyway, so I recommend the show heartily. Book is fine. It's fine. It's fine. I don't know if I'm going to continue the series. Second book is called Goldstein, I guess, as far as I can, looking at this. Also, this book, of course, isn't even called Babylon Berlin in German. It's called Die Nasse Fische. Actually, let me check that. Der Nasse Fisch. Gideon Rath's erster Fall. Which would mean, well, Gideon Rath's first, I'm not sure what Fall means, and I don't exactly know what Der Nasse Fisch means. However, I think it means the wet fish. And I understand why they wouldn't call this book The Wet Fish in English, because that doesn't mean anything in English. But in the book, it's clear that there is a, what's the word? There's a phrase in German that would translate to the wet fish, but it refers to, like, a case that hasn't been solved. So, some of the cases in this book are relegated to the wet fish, and they keep saying stuff like that, and I'm like, it sounds dumb in English, but okay, thanks. Obviously, I guess maybe I wasn't 100% clear. This was in German originally, and translated in English, so. Anyway, I am now taking up far too much time. More time than this book is worth, but it was not bad. It was okay. I might read the sequel. I don't know. And I am really hoping we get a season 4 of Babylon Berlin soon, maybe? Also, it would be really fun if it would stop being 1929 at any point. I think it's still 1929, season 3. I'm like, why are we still in 1929? Will this year never end? But anyway. Okay, this is enough. I'm gonna go. Alright, hello. Alright, so I can already tell that I am not gonna get a lot of books finished in October, but, probably. But I wish I could hold this one up to show you how fucking long it was, but I can't because I listened to it. Anyway, like 800 pages, okay? Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow. I did it, guys. It took me a month. Yeah, it definitely took me a month to read. But, I mean, it was good. So I 100% read it because my parents got Disney Plus, like, several months ago, like back in the summer, and I finally watched Hamilton, and it was really good, obviously. And then I was like, well, I guess I could read, I could read the book, because I'm curious. So yeah, it was interesting. This is more than I ever wanted to know about Alexander Hamilton. I mean, to be honest, before the musical came out, I knew almost nothing about him, so like, whatever. But, interesting historical figure. I think a lot of the focus, at least for me, a lot of the focus on kind of founding fathers of the U.S. was very much on all the people who became president. So, like, I mean, because back in the day, when I was a kid, I used to be kind of obsessed with U.S. presidents and, like, learning about that history. So it's kind of followed through to the present day, where I just think the history of U.S. presidents is really interesting, but I don't get in there that often. But anyway, obviously Hamilton was never president, or maybe not obviously if you don't know anything about him, but he was never president. He also lived a significantly less amount of time. Jesus, that's a bad way to phrase that. He was outlived, at least in years, by, like, a ton of the famous people that we think of as founding fathers of the U.S. Many of whom lived to be in their 80s. Like, they were just a long-lived bunch of people in general. And Washington obviously, like, died before he did, or before Hamilton did, but, like, a lot of them, you know, kept on living after his death. And, he's also kind of, a lot of his story is about, like, the economy and the Treasury Department and taxes and banking, all of which I find incredibly boring. So, yeah. But I was interested in the person and in sort of the interactions between all these different people. And, like, let me tell you, there is nothing like learning about the Founding Fathers being a bunch of petty sons of bitches, like, constantly, like, writing anonymous screeds in the newspapers about how much they hate each other. I mean, usually they kept it kind of like, you know, they kept it above board. They kept it, like, criticizing policies, mostly. Some people got a bit further down in the gutter and were like, oh, John Adams, for one, called Hamilton a Creole bastard, like, a lot. And I was like, that's not necessary, bro. That's not necessary. But, it was interesting. It was interesting to see how just over the years, like, the political parties formed and all the things they fought over, and Hamilton was just an interesting character because he's kind of and I think Lin-Manuel Miranda, obviously, like, he read this book and then he wrote the musical because he picked up on this, clearly. So the fact that Hamilton is kind of almost this microcosm of, like, the American success story, the American dream, I don't know, as somebody who comes to America as, like, in his late teens, you know, from the Caribbean, and, you know, he's an immigrant and doesn't have, like, really any family supporting him at all, and, like, has to kind of make himself, and he comes to America in just the perfect time to do that in an odd way. So yeah, and just, it must have been such an interesting time, but also a sort of, like, frighteningly unstable time to live in America. And I think, you know, it gives you a good picture of, like, all of these figures, of a lot of the stuff that went down. Hamilton wasn't present for kind of the decade or 15 years or so kind of before the Declaration of Independence, where a lot of kind of groundwork was being done to just get the country to the point where this was something they're considering doing. So he wasn't there for that, but he was there for basically every other significant event afterwards. Like, well, okay, he wasn't involved in the Declaration either, but he was involved in the Revolution, and of course he was sort of a sort of secretary type job to Washington, and was making all these decisions, and, like, I don't know, I mean, what other fucking facts about Hamilton can we dole out? He had, like, 8 kids, he had a brother, fun fact, didn't know that, but he did. He actually did know, like, who his father's family was, and they lived in Scotland, so he kind of, like, wasn't really connected to them much at all, but he knew who they were. There was, but we don't need to get into that. The whole Mariah Reynolds affair, kind of hilarious. He had a penchant for, like, being incapable of shutting up, and Howie's having to have the last word, and being like very micromanagey and a smart ass, and like very like he made some serious blunders. One of them was that Mariah Reynolds like pamphlet. I mean, obviously having an affair was a blunder too, but like deciding 20 years later that, was it 20? That seems like a lot, maybe not 20, but years later that everybody needed to know about it. Well, there were reasons for this, but pretty much all his friends were like, this is stupid, you shouldn't do this, like just let it blow over, just ignore the accusation. But you know, so he made choices and they weren't always the best, but he's honestly seems like he was a pretty good person. I mean, like, it's interesting too to kind of consider the politics, because like there were two political parties, major political parties in America at the time, but they don't like one-to-one correlate onto the parties of today, so it's a lot easier to kind of look at them and go and pick pieces from both of them and be like, oh, okay, it's like some of this is okay and some of this is annoying. The Alien and Sedition Act's total garbage, but a lot of the stuff the Federalists did does make sense. Hamilton, of course, is a Federalist. He also got into this penchant like later in life where he was not a fan of immigration, and I was like, hi, bro. But so that was stupid. But yeah, and then Burr shot him, which, can you fucking imagine? The Vice President of the United States shoots a guy in a duel. I mean, I try to make the comparison of, like, what if Mike Pence just up and fucking killed somebody? But, like, you can't even make the comparison. Because Mike Pence is incredibly weird and no one likes him. And who would he even kill that would have, like, an equivalent effect? I don't know. And it's also interesting, too, though, because the Republicans, or Democratic Republicans, I think was, like, the full party name, which was like basically everybody else, Jefferson and Madison and whoever, were all part of that party. And they maligned Hamilton up and down and all over the place, and they were always saying all sorts of unpleasant things about him. And they had all sorts of bugbears about how he'd like stolen money from the Treasury, which he hadn't, and like gambled money on bank fucking whatever, I don't know, like there was this whole thing where when banks open, you like buy shares in them and you can like make money off of it. I don't really remember what that's called. And they were like, oh, he made a bunch of money that way. He didn't. And just all these lies. And it was just interesting to read because like you look at that and you're just like, boy, we haven't changed much, have we? Because like you'll just kind of, I don't know. It reminds me kind of the way the Republicans treat Hillary Clinton. They just hate her guts, even though she's never really done anything. Or like, the other thing, I'll end it on this. There was a quote that I wish I had, you know, if I'd had the real copy, I would have copied it down to actually look at, you know, because it was just so perfect. But it was something that Hamilton wrote describing, kind of despairing cynically a little bit about the American people. And he said basically that we're too individualistic and don't care enough about facts. And I was like, he fucking knew it. We haven't changed. But yeah. When you think about it, it wasn't that long ago. So, anyway, it was a good book. It's been fun facts about Alexander Hamilton every night at dinner in this house for like a month. So I'm sure my family's like overjoyed that I'm done with it. Anyway, moving on. Hello. The Robots of Dawn by Isaac Asimov. So, this book is the third book of the Robot Trilogy, as I've been calling it. I don't know if that's what it's officially known as. About the detective Elijah Bailey and his sometime detective partner, the robot Daniel Olivo. And in this one, he has to go to the planet of Aurora in order to solve the murder of a robot. Everyone keeps being like, we can't really call it a murder because he's a robot. But like, whatever. He died, and everyone is saying the only person who could possibly have done it is the guy who created him, because he was another humaniform robot like Daniel. The only other one. And yeah, and I don't know, it's like incredibly difficult to like get a robot to kind of shut down because that's what happened, like his brain shut down, rather than it's not like somebody attacked him physically, like, yeah. And it was some sort of complicated robotic laws issue. And, yeah, and the book continues apace. I don't know. There's a lot of weird stuff in this book. This book is about robots, and it's about sex, and I don't know how I feel about this. It's not really what I want from my Asimov. I'm like, okay, let's not do it. But, whatever. It was fine. I think I enjoyed the previous books of the series more. I don't really know why. Like, maybe I just thought the mysteries of the murders were more interesting. This one was just like, I don't know. And then the ultimate solution, well, the ultimate solution was kind of a letdown. But then the book was also like, Bailey also feels like this is kind of a letdown. And then my camera died, so enjoy the completely different lighting from hours later. But I was talking about this book. Okay, yes, let's see, I liked the other two of the trilogy better. I guess I thought those mysteries were more intriguing. And I also kind of found, like, the extremes of how they live on Earth and how they live on Solaria more interesting than how they live on Aurora, which is honestly a lot more normal. Yeah, they still have robots, but, like, the most interesting thing about Auroran society was how they're all kind of convinced that they have no anti-robot prejudice or anything. But, like, they do. Like, there are still a lot of, like, unwritten rules about how you treat robots and interact with them and whatever, that the Aurorans just kind of, like, don't, I guess, think of. And Bailey is like, well, I see all this stuff because I'm an outsider. But yeah, I don't know. There was just, it was a weird book. It was weird. It was weird. But like I said, there's a lot of weird stuff about sex in here. And not to be a super prude or anything, I don't mind reading about that kind of thing. And it was fine. It's just maybe not what I want from Isaac Asimov, of all people. I'm like, this man has such a middle-aged physics professor vibe. I don't know. I don't want to hear it. But, oh boy, whatever. It does bring up the whole, hey, can people fuck robots? Yes, and they do. So, like, I guess we appreciate that maybe on some level. It's weird. There's weird stuff, but there's good stuff. I also quite like this cover. The other books, the editions I had are like a later edition, I guess, but this is apparently a first edition. Like, I looked, inside the book. This is a first edition of this book that some library in the Chicagoland area has for some reason. Not that it matters, but I just kind of find it, amusing to think that they just got it and then it's been there all these years. Okay. Oh, I also enjoy, for one last thing, I enjoy how the title in the back is just in bright pink. Kind of wish it was in bright pink on the cover, too, because it wouldn't look good, but I'd kind of enjoy it. Alright, whatever. It's not the freaking point. I will say one last thing, which is that now that I'm done with the Robot Trilogy, the next book to read is going to be Foundations. I'm, like, finally going to get into it, probably next year. But, yeah, because I've never read any of the Foundation novels. Fun fact about me, I've read a lot of Asimov, just it's all been like other random crap. Which I think is mostly more interesting to me anyway. But like, I gotta read Foundation. Oh, also I guess it's worth mentioning that they talk about psychohistory and the idea that if you could figure out all the laws that make human brains tick, you could predict what humans are going to do in any given situation. You could predict the future, which is essentially how psychohistory in Foundation works. That's my understanding, having not read it. So this is kind of like the little sparks of an idea right at the beginning, millions or whatever of years before it kind of comes to fruition. I don't know, when's Foundation set? But it's really far in the future, right? Anywho, yeah, so I feel like if that's what this book contributes, maybe. But otherwise, I kind of, it was okay. Alright, this should be a quick one. I read Kenobi by John Jackson Miller, which is obviously a Star Wars book. This is a reread. According to Goodreads, I read it like 6 years ago, which I didn't know would have been that long, but okay. And this is set right after Revenge of the Sith, and is about, it's about Tusken Raiders, and it's about like kind of the community of water farmers, I don't know what they're called, on Tatooine, and generally is kind of like a Western, but Star Wars. Obi-Wan is the kind of mysterious hermit who rides in, and everyone is way more interested in him than he thought they would be, because he's never lived in like the back of nowhere, and he doesn't know how bored everyone is. The main character is this woman, Annaline, who runs the this place called Danner's Claim, which was started by her husband, and is basically like an oasis with like a restaurant and bar and garage and general store, and it's got like a little bit of everything. And there have been Tusken Raiders attacking, you know, local farmers, and for the last however many years, like maybe 5 or 6 or 7 years, they've had this thing called the Settler's Call, where basically they have an alarm system. So if someone gets attacked, everybody gets together and puts together a posse and comes out there and tries to help them. But there's also a focus on the leader of this particular band of Tuskens, whose name is Ayark, and that's a really interesting character. Actually, I really like this book. I mean, that's why I decided to read it again. It's kind of like, I think it's an interesting take on what Obi-Wan might have been doing on Tatooine immediately post Revenge of the Sith, because like, he doesn't even know about Darth Vader yet, interestingly. He actually, like, this is explained right at the beginning of the book. He thinks that Anakin is dead. And so you kind of have to go into it with that context. But the focus is mostly on the other characters on Tatooine and how they perceive Obi-Wan. So it's kind of interesting because they don't know anything about him. Obviously, because he's trying to be incognito. He even just goes by Ben and then doesn't tell anybody his full name until one of the other characters finds out what it is. But it's interesting. I don't know. I like this book. I don't have like a ton to say about it, but it's especially, I think, a time period that I think is interesting, and there's just maybe not enough like Star Wars content set during immediately post Revenge of the Sith, because it's like this transition into Empire, and especially interesting in Tatooine because they don't really know what's going on. They've never paid that much attention to the Republic. They've heard rumors that something's gone down, but they don't really like, is this even going to affect us? I don't know. So it's interesting, and yeah, and I like how it feels like a Western, and I like how, you know, it's about this whole like community of people. Yeah. Alright, today I finished listening to my audiobook of the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. That was really good. Yeah, so this is the beginning of a high fantasy trilogy, and the kind of basic idea behind the whole thing is that the Earth is broken, hence the Broken Earth trilogy, and basically there's just so often these seismic events or volcanoes going off or huge tsunamis or whatever that humanity is kind of like obsessed with the inevitability of the next season, as they call it, and preparing for it, and what you're supposed to do when there is a season. And there have been a bunch of them, so it's not like outrageous that they are. But there are also people on Earth, on the planet, that have the ability to control rock and earthquakes and whatnot, like with their minds. And everybody has sort of a a part of the sort of the back of their brain that enables them to sense some of this stuff. It's just that the people with the actual like abilities, it's way more pronounced. So kind of it starts off being about three different timelines, and as the book goes on you figure out kind of where they are relative to each other, although one of them is very obviously after the other two, because it's also after a huge like thing that happens right at the beginning that is going to herald the new horrible season. And like, this book is great, honestly. Like, 1/3 of it is written in second person, which is weird, but whatever. And the rest isn't, so like, you don't have to deal with that constantly. And the world building is so elaborate and interesting, and I was just like, I am amazed. I'm like, yeah, I get it. All the Hugos for you. All of them. Because the Broken Earth trilogy, rather famously, all three books won the Hugo Award for Best Novel in their respective years. So, like, I have to read them. But anyway, so I really enjoyed it, and I really recommend it. It was just like interesting to read, and there was just a lot going on, and also just there's a lot of questions by the end of the book as to just like, you know, what made the world this way, what's going to happen in the future, the immediate future really. And yeah, and my favorite character is Alabaster. And he might be a monster, but whatever, is my favorite. It's also super dark. It is very horrifying. It's interesting because I feel like most of the stuff I've read that gets real dark, especially fantasy, tends to be focused around war, and this isn't at all. There's no war going on, I guess, beyond between kind of people trying to just fucking live and the earth trying to kill them. But there's just a lot of really disturbing shit, which I like. So it's like, it's really good. It's really good. I don't know. That's not exactly a revelation, but I've heard that N.K. Jemison's writing style is a bit polarizing. I liked it. It was fine for me. I've heard a lot of people say this is in second person, so I was like, okay. But only 1/3 of it is. So I think even if it's kind of an odd choice, I think it's okay, because like a lot of the book is not like that. And also, I don't know, that seems like kind of a minor thing to put you off reading a book. Like, if it otherwise sounds kind of interesting, like, you should give it a go. But I don't know, otherwise her writing style's fine. There's nothing weird about it. I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, it's good. Yeah, it's really good. Like, I'm definitely reading the second book, which is The Obelisk Gate. I think The Obelisk Gate. Pretty soon.